Everyone. Welcome to this, I think, fifth day of COP, maybe. I think we're all like a little bit lost. So we welcome you all, and also thanks for the organizers. The Lutheran World Federation, Franciscans International, World Council of Churches, Dominicans for Justice and Peace, Brahma, Kumaris, All Africa Conference of Churches, Evangelical Lutheran Church of America, and I forgot to present myself. So I'm Igor. I'm from the Laudato Si movement, which is a Catholic movement addressing social and ecological issues, and I'm based in Brazil. Yeah, the next host of COP30. So the side event is about loss and damage from the perspective of the faith communities. Currently in COP29, we have discussions on the review of Warsaw International Mechanisms, Santiago Network, and Fund for Responding Loss and Damage. This is timely for us to discuss on the aspect of non-economic loss and damage. So let's be together in our faith, addressing all these important issues that are really well connected to our faith and spirituality. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Igor. Maybe just to quickly recognize the panelists who would be introduced properly when it is time for them to respond to the questions that already has been shared with each one of them. From the extreme right there is Archbishop Giulio Marip, the Archbishop of the Anglican Communion in Panama, and of course responsible and leading the Anglican Communion team here. So we're delighted to have you. Seated next to him, to his left, is Wara. Wara is from the Dominican Republic, or is it Bolivia? Because I mean, yesterday, Bolivia, I see here in the document, Dominican Republic. So, but anyway, she embodies the indigenous people. So we are grateful. Thank you, Wara. And we seated next to Wara is my brother, Maro. From the Kenyan Evangelical Lutheran Church, but part of the team of the Lutheran World Federation. Thank you, Maro, for coming.
And ACT Alliance.
Sorry? And ACT Alliance, okay. Yes, an ACT Alliance team. And seated next to Maro is Camila. Is it? Sorry? Because on the list here, I don't see Stephanie. What happened? Where's Camila? Stephanie, okay, so, okay. Sorry, Stephanie. We welcome you, Stephanie. And seated next to Stephanie is Sister Maureen. Yes, thank you, thank you. So they would be properly introduced when they are to respond to the questions that have been prepared for them. The panelists, the first panelist who would respond to the questions as provided is Wara Iris Gondori. Wara is an indigenous leader from Bolivia's Aymara community and activist for climate change. She also is a youth empowerment specialist and professor in publicity and entrepreneurship. She is passionate about graphic design and photography. So you can imagine the kind of photography we're going to have here today with the presence of Wara. Wara, in the next 7 minutes, we would expect you to respond to the following questions. As a faith-based organization, we want to contribute to a better understanding of loss and damage, especially the non-economic related loss and damage caused by climate change. Indigenous communities across the globe have been disproportionately affected by climate change. What are some of the non-economic loss and damage impacts faced by indigenous communities? Please, Ms. Wara, your 7 minutes starts now.
Okay, hi everyone. I am very happy to be here and I am happy to share all of the perspectives from indigenous communities. I am from Bolivia. I belong to a community, Aymara people from La Paz, Mecapaca. And when we are facing the impact of climate change in our communities, I will tell you from my perspective and experience. We were facing like 2 years of droughts in our community. We didn't have enough water because of climate change. We have lost in the Amazon like thousands and millions of forest. So in Los Andes, we don't have rain enough to have food. So many of our brothers and sisters in our community don't have enough water for our crops. And then we started to migrating to the peri-urban areas, urban areas, because we don't have food and even we don't have food for selling. And that was our only income for many families. Then when we started migrating, we have lost many of our traditional knowledge. And I think that is the principal non-economical loss and damage that we are facing. When we started migrating, we forgot a lot of our native language, our knowledge about some plants, our knowledge about how to crop with land even, and we are started forgetting our roots. And that was an incredible, and it is an incredible problem issue that we are facing right now, because some of our youth also are forgetting our language and our traditions. And how could we stop that? That's the question. And that's why we are here, in order to raise our voices that something is happening, and in the loss and damage and in the global goals of adaptation, we have to take into account that climate change is creating a climate migration. And that is one of the factors that impact our the transfer, or how we share our traditional knowledge to the next generations. So if we not take into account this into the decisions here in COP 29, we are forgetting a very big issue. And we promote that the leaders in COP 29 take into account that climate migration is really affecting people, really affecting indigenous people around the world. In the traditional knowledge, in our traditional knowledge for the next generations. And maybe we have to raise our voices in order to get some solutions, real solutions, and we don't want to migrate just for we don't have enough water in our communities. We have to migrate because it is an election. It's not a necessity. So and we want that even we don't need to migrate and we want to remain in our territories, in our lands, and we need more resources and also more well-being factors in our indigenous communities. So I think for our people, indigenous peoples and local communities, there are so much to do right now, but if we raise these terms and these ideas in the places where we are negotiating, because I think not only indigenous peoples can raise up the voices for us, but also all the communities and all the organizations around the world. It could be a domino effect proposal for the leads here. So I wanted to raise that, and yeah, we are stronger if we could raise these terms and then these ideas for the people that we are talking in this COP. So thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Wara. Muchas gracias. It's so nice to have a neighbor in this event from Bolivia, sharing all the impacts of climate change in Latin America and especially related to migration. So yeah, that's a region, one of the most impacted regions as well. So thank you so much for bringing your voice here in this event. So our second speaker will be Mr. Stephanie. Miss, I'm so sorry, but my English is not that good. Miss Stephanie Stephens, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, so maybe this one is right. She is from Vanuatu and currently National Project Coordinator at Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations in Vanuatu. She is co-authors of case study on non-economic loss and damages to Vanuatu's coastal ecosystem and community livelihoods from slow onset events to support the design and operationalization of the loss and damage fund that was submitted to the UNFCCC in 2023. So in this 7 minutes, so we have the following question. How is the experience of Vanuatu with regards to non-economic loss and damage? Vanuatu is a member of the SEEDS Small Lands Development States, and based on that, how does your delegation addressing the non-economic loss and damage through the three mechanisms YIM, Santiago Network, Fund for Responding Loss and Damage, and have those mechanisms respond to the need of the affected communities in Vanuatu? And the last one, what still need to be done? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Moderator, for the opportunity. And so sorry for the mistake you see on the picture. It's not me, it's my other colleague. So my name is Anda. So I'm Stephanie Stevens from Vanuatu with the Vanuatu delegation. It's a privilege to be here among my distinguished colleagues to speak and of course in front of you all. So yes, again, Stephanie Stevens from Vanuatu, working for Food and Agriculture Organization, but also serving and supporting the Vanuatu Climate Action Network, which is a local-based action network, which links to the Pacific Climate Action Network and the CAN International, Climate Action Network International. Today, I'll be sharing with you some insights of non-economic loss and damage, and I look forward for an engaging discussion and also to learn from all of each other from our experiences. So Vanuatu, as one of the small island developing states, has faced impact of non-economic loss and damage due to climate change. Beyond economic devastation, our community experienced profound losses in culture, losses of life, identity, well-being, and social cohesion. There are losses that cannot be replaced financially and are deeply embedded in our way of life and our identity. So through mechanisms like WOSWO International Mechanism, WIM, Santiago Network, and the new Loss and Damage Fund, we are pushing for meaningful support. So Vanuatu has consistently advocating for a strengthened WIM to be fit for purpose to address the scale of non-economic loss and damage our community are facing. We have proposed that the WIM adopt an annual loss and damage gap report to comprehensively document loss and damage globally, highlighting non-economic dimensions such as loss of culture and human rights. Additionally, Vanuatu's call for justice-based approach for financing acknowledges that the finance response must account for the severe, often irreversible non-economic losses our communities are facing. So now for the Santiago Network, Vanuatu is fully aware that a mechanism is needed for the Santiago Network to fully function. And Vanuatu is happy to share the ongoing learning of the development of the procedures and mechanisms to respond on loss and damage. As the first country to formally request support from the Santiago Network, Vanuatu has pushed for assistance in assessing capacity gap, local capacity building, and developing long-term national programs for loss and damage. We are calling for Santiago Network to work with us on the development of the mechanism to ensure an effective response on loss and damage. We believe that the learning and experience of Vanuatu is developing will shape and formulate an effective approach and mechanism to ensure effective flow of loss and damage fund to the most affected and vulnerable communities. Now for the new loss and damage fund, these new funds represent hope. However, we need immediate and substantial contributions from other countries. The fund should prioritize support for programs that protect cultural heritage, well-being, and community resilience, which are very vital for our survival and dignity. While these mechanisms represent positive steps, they are yet to fully address Vanuatu's and other vulnerable nations' need. Like mechanisms like WIM and Santiago Network have elevated the non-economic loss and damage in international discussions, but they fall short in delivering resources and on-ground support. So to fully meet the need of Vanuatu and other vulnerable nations, we believe that, as I mentioned, an annual gap report on loss and damage, including non-economic impacts, so that the world can see and respond to the scale of this crisis. A swift response from Santiago Network to process and respond to requests for technical support from affected communities, allocated loss and damage fund, must have a window of non-economic loss and economic loss and damage, especially for programs that maintain culture and community resilience. And lastly, localized solution where the community have decision-making power to support and address non-economic loss and damage in culturally relevant way. In conclusion, for Vanuatu, fully addressing climate justice means recognizing and remedying these irreplaceable losses. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stephanie, for highlighting the impact of climate change, not just only on Vanuatu, but what you have raised, what you have highlighted, clearly are the realities, the lived experience of the people in small islands and many other vulnerable nations, and how those mechanisms will be able to respond to the needs oftentimes is a challenge. And so thank you very much for highlighting that. Our next speaker is Mr. Maro. He's a young climate activist from the Kenyan Evangelical Lutheran Church. He's a passionate global youth advocate for the SDGs and a climate change activist from Kenya. Mr. Maro currently serves as the focal point for climate advocacy at the Kenyan Evangelical Lutheran Church Youth Department, but also doubles up as one of the commissioners to the Lutheran World Federation Climate Justice Task Force and one of the LWF's global youth reformers. And like he did mention earlier and clarified, he's also part of the team of ACT Alliance. Mr. Maro, please.
Thank you so much, Dr. Les Morris. I want to open up and be very honest to you because this is one of my emotional session that I'll be having with us. So I want to make it as honest as possible. When we're talking of loss and damage and talking of non-economic losses and damages, we must really assess if whether the conversation in the UNFCCC is strategic or unstrategic, programmatic or organizational, because already the theme is there. We know the losses and damages that are happening. We talk of a loss and damage fund, but we fail to understand that this fund serves as an immediate response to what we are experiencing. Because when we give monies for technological support and infrastructure, that is an immediate need, and tend to forget of the long-term effects that people have been experiencing. I want to highlight in this text, for example, the global goal of adaptation. For those who are following the conversation here, you would understand that one of the goals is to have clear, definitive monitoring indicators that will really justify if whether the national adaptations plan in our respective countries are being made. Likewise, I feel like, and it's really important because research has shown that this subject is being discussed, it's being featured in reports, but we're failing to account for the long-term impacts that people are experiencing. I have to notify you today that my stay here will be cut short. I have to go back tomorrow to my country, Kenya, to have a decent burial to my grandmother, my biological grandmother, to my father. Um, the burial ceremony cannot go on unless the immediate grandchildren are there. That is why I have to go tomorrow. That is as per our culture. Be it as contemptuous as it might appear right now, that what about the other grandchildren who are not there in Kenya? But one thing that is bothering me right now is her last wish, which of course marries with our traditions, that the living dead, the immediate ancestors, have to be buried to our sacred burial sites and lands. And one of the saddest things that I'm thinking of is that we no longer can't do that. We can't do that because we've been systematically forced out of such places because of the ongoing floods. We can't do it anymore. And therefore, the conversations that have been going on right now is how best can we honor our traditions and our wishes. And this makes me think of several other things, the systematic displaced migrations that are adaptive in nature. I am a young man. I can relocate to somewhere else and get to adapt to a certain culture that, of course, I don't identify with, but of course, it gives me a sense of livelihood. What of that who can't migrate to that area? They are forced to stay in the same areas that, of course, are dangerous. And for those of us who are in these adaptive areas, we have to support them economically. And in a way, we bring on the dependency ratio, and it affects the entire economic agenda. She has a right to her own culture. She has a right to her own language as an indigenous people. My tribe has our own right to preserve our culture. The Pokomo tribe is their right to preserve their living dead in sacred areas, especially to my clan, Sindo Akamwelo, Sindo Ahaju. It's really important that my grandmother gets to her last wish, but you realize that some of these things cannot be made. Yet we are here and we're talking of losses and damages, but failing to account for the non-economic losses and damages, migration, displacement, mental health, and such kind of things. And the question therefore begs, what can the youth do? One of the most important things, as I started by alluding, is number one, to be strategic and push for this agenda to also fit in the UNFCCC systems and see if we are, in fact, ahead of the AR7 constitutions. There'll be a new cycle of report, and it's very important for us to lobby and see how best nails can be captured and see if whether these communities can also be repatriated in a way. When you talk to people, the only thing, because they have lost hope, the only thing they wish for, they will tell you, oh, I don't wish for such a thing again to happen. When people are not living in their ancestral lands, they tell you, I don't wish for this to happen, because they even can't see the need for adaptive measures. I think NELs bring into nexus one key thing that is linking between loss and damage and other adaptive structures, because it is the only approach that is justifying the mitigative needs to the adaptive needs. This is an overspill and a long-term effect of losses and damages. And therefore, it's not just enough for us to stop the conversation at losses and damages. As a youth, what can I do? number one, I would say, is to raise awareness and mobilize collective action. Okay. I am aware, I'm part of the Lutheran World Federation Global Young Reformers. I'm aware that we've done a study and there is a framework that has been established, that really identifies these gaps and identifies ways with which communities can be gotten to and they can be served back and justice is served to them. I think this also needs to get to the UNFCCC, and that cannot happen if we do not raise awareness, because sometimes we fail to know that we being inhumanly treated, because we do not know that it's our right, it's our own human dignity. Unless we know that this is our right, then we can't stand up for our own rights. And therefore, we need to raise up and speak to these things, okay? That is number one. And number two, we have to collaborate. It's really important. And today I leave the halls of Baku with the hope that the faith-based communities are doing something. If there is a framework that has been established somewhere, what if we collaborate together and get to lobby to the AR7 that something meaningful has to be included that will really make an impact equally as much as we are pushing for the NCQG, we are pushing for the gender issue, we are pushing for the loss and damage funds. This one also calls for collaborations among the ecumenical community and fraternity, because we are doing a lot and we are doing a great job and we are setting the scene and the bar so high in this conversation. Lastly, this speaks to my own passion and to the people who are watching and to the youth who are present there. When we talk of climate advocacy and climate justice, it's a relentless call of duty and action. We have to occupy these spaces, no matter how small they are, so long as they are at our disposal. We have to occupy them and see whether we can bring meaningful change and add value to this conversation by means of educating ourselves, by means of doing research, by means of highlighting our story. That is why no matter how personal it is, I thought of sharing with you that I have to go back and try to add value to a community that is being systematically oppressed by social factors that haven't been yet highlighted in the global level. It's important for us to acknowledge that non-economic losses and damages are also affecting us, and we need to highlight our stories for the world to listen and to hear. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mauro, for being this prophetic voice in this space. I think we all can feel that he's speaking from the heart, right? And this is really powerful and touchful, because sometimes in these discussions, really technical discussions, we just miss the people who are really and directly affected by the topics that we are discussing here. And then when we hear a person talking from the heart, it's also a way to touch our hearts as well, to don't miss those who are being affected by the climate crisis. So thank you so much for that. And now, as another panelist, and we already heard voices from the indigenous leader from Bolivia, a representative from Vanuatu, also this powerful voice from youth from Kenya. We now invite also a prophet voice from Panama, also raising a voice from the Central America. So we invite Archbishop Julio Murray, who is the chair of the Anglican Communion Environmental Network and moderator of the World Council of Churches Commission on Climate Justice and Sustainable Development. He is a Panamanian Anglican bishop and was the primate of Iglesias Anglicana de la Región Central América, IARCA, and Anglican Province and Transnational Church in the Central America region, which in turn belongs to the worldwide, the Anglican Communion, he was elected in April 2018 and installed in August 2018 as well. He is the current Bishop of Panama of the Anglican Diocese of Panama. He also studied theology in 3 institutions: the Latin American Biblical Seminary in Costa Rica, the National University of Heredia, and the American Biblical University of Costa Rica. He also attended the Bosse Institute in Switzerland. So thank you so much, Archbishop Julio Murai. And our question for you is, why does faith-based perspective matter in the discussion on non-economic loss and damage? Thank you.
Buenos días, tengan todos y todas. Good morning to all. I think it's important for you to hear the original languages that are present at the table this morning in the panel, y por eso me dirijo a ustedes en español también. First of all, I want to set the stage and why it's important that faith-based organizations be present in any discussion. One, because we have a ministry of presence. And what does a ministry of presence mean? When disasters happen, faith-based organizations are there. Before they happen, faith-based organizations are there. And when the government decide to pick up and leave, faith-based organizations are always there with the grassroots, with the community. So that gives us the opportunity to be present and to make sure that other perspectives are brought to the table and they are matters that are important. The ministry of presence is one. Second reason why faith-based organizations need to be present is because of our acceptability. Locally based with norms and values that promote a culture of respect and sacredness of life. And third, faith-based organizations provide affirming hope. And you're going to hear me not only talk about affirming hope, we're going to talk about another type of hope in a while. But then how important it is for us to reimagine what hope looks like in the midst of difficult situations that we are affecting globally and locally. Why does faith-based organizations matter in the discussion on non-economic loss and damage? Now, we realize that both economic and non-economic loss and damage must be addressed by providing grant-based finance for vulnerable communities. Because we have also identified that there are other types of losses that cannot be paid with money. The life of a person cannot be brought back to life because of no matter how much money you put into it. The loss of livelihood cannot be brought back again once it's lost. So it's a matter of working not only in preparedness for the community, not only in resilience that the community needs to develop, but there are also other types of losses that we need to address. My sister and brother that spoke before me were clear in identifying the loss of the cultural, the history, the legacy, and the tradition of our communities, especially indigenous communities. But there's also a loss that has to do with the psychological loss that needs to be addressed. There is a new type of identity that also has been lost. Indigenous communities no longer identify themselves as such, but now they are looked upon as the climate change victims, and they're also looked upon as the affected population. They have lost their identity. When we talk about relocating people from the island homes that they have been living on so long. That sense of not having the opportunity to come back to the places where you have buried your ancestors, where you can place flowers at a grave or be present at the grave site. It's because the place that was once known as a graveyard, it's now underwater. And that brings about that psychological loss that I just mentioned. It's a new form that impacts at the intensity of the life of the most vulnerable. It also increases inequality and social conflict, stress, trauma, and mental health, anxiety and depression among our people. These are issues that need to be dealt with. And it's not only going to take money to do so. We also need specialized resources of people that will be able to step in and accompany. NGOs and churches are doing this type of work, and that is why we become so relevant in the space. If you ask me, two things that we're looking about: life and justice. Justice has to do with the need for the voices of the most vulnerable to be present at the table of decisions. There was once we said, we need to become the voice of the voiceless. That's no longer the case. We need to make sure that the voiceless come with their voice, come with their faces, and we need to be the ones who articulate the spaces where these voices can be heard. You're talking about the young people. They are not the generation of tomorrow. They are the generation of today. And there is an opportunity to listen to their voice because it's an important voice. Memories have been lost and cannot be replaced. No more. Traditions have been lost and cannot be replaced. As I said, there's a new identity, and this identity has to do with forced migration. That's a word that's not a bad word. My ancestors were migrants coming from Barbados and Jamaica. And they were migrants at the time when the construction of the railroad and the Panama Canal happened. And it was so interesting that after the construction of the Panama Canal and the railroad, they wanted to stay in Panama and have their family. But surprisingly, there was a president that said, we're not going to have you migrants come and take over in our country. And he ordered that the children that are from migrants of Barbados and Jamaica and China be castrated so that they will not have more children in the area and the land. Migrants is not a bad thing. Migrants make countries move from being developing countries into developed countries because of the hard work and the sweat and the blood that is put into it by migrants. So what are the things that we need to start looking into? We need to pay more attention to mitigation and adaptation, but also we need to pay more attention to resilience of the most vulnerable. We need to pay more attention to the loss of identity of the indigenous people, of African descent people. We need to have them understand that there's not a new culture. These are just labels that people have been placing on them for them to forget where they're coming from. We need to pay attention to the traditional knowledge that is lost. And we also need to pay attention to the mental, the physical, and the stress-related anxiety and depression that is affected by the people who are experiencing loss and damage that is not economically based. I thank you.
Your Grace, the Archbishop have raised fundamental issues and reminded us of our relevance as faith communities, the ministry of presence, our social capital in terms of acceptance, trust. And what struck me was the bit where he mentioned about the impact of forced migration to the extent that brutal regime had to impose the rule for castration of migrant children. And these brutal regimes are emerging even today, who are shamelessly out to use their resources and powers and authority to silence. But we must choose to be united and refuse to be silenced in the face of injustice. The Archbishop concluded with the mentioning of two key themes: life and justice, very critical. We must be driven by that. And an intentional hope, a hope that will not be weaponized and instrumentalized to silence us, to postpone justice matter. So thank you very much, Archbishop Julio, for highlighting this bit, and we shall come to engage thereafter. Our next speaker is Sister Maureen Goodman from the Brahma Kumaris, UK. She is the program director for Brahma Kumaris, UK, and the Brahma Kumaris representative at the United Nations, Vienna. Sister Maureen has endeavored to make spirituality accessible to people at all levels of society, including in healthcare, education, with young people and women's issues. From 1991, for 20 years, she oversaw the Brahman Kumaris work within the UK prison system, spirituality in prison, offering meditation and values-based workshops in prisons and residential seminars for staff. Sister Maureen has had long-term involvement in interreligious dialogue and represents the Brahman Kumaris on the board of religious leaders of the Elijah Interfaith Institute and the Peace Pledge to live loving kindness and compassion. Please join me to welcome Sister Maureen for her presentation. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this very, very important session. And I'm also addressing the relevance of faith-based organizations of faith to non-economic loss and damage. And I understand that the relevance of faith, in essence, is about putting humanity at the heart of everything, at the heart of our decision-making, at the heart of our vision. Bishop Julio, you mentioned, Archbishop, about the indigenous people, and I was recently in Cali at the COP for biodiversity, and the experiences of the indigenous people were very heartbreaking. But at the same time, for the first time, a subsidiary body was created to give a voice, to an official voice, to indigenous communities and to local communities, which means that the governments have to consult them. And I hope that this may happen in other COPs also. But thinking about the relevance of faith, when we look at things just in terms of numbers, in terms of economics, we are not seeing the whole person. In fact, often we're not seeing the person at all. And yes, loss of life has been mentioned, and no amount of money can buy that back. But what about the healing of the people who are left behind? This is non-economic loss and damage. Faiths are also about affirming human dignity, and definitely affirming human dignity in times of crisis. I just have one little story, but I think it illustrates this. When members of our community were serving, it was in an earthquake zone, and they were with people who one day had everything, and the next day they had to ask for a plate of food, and they felt the loss of dignity. And actually, we didn't just want to distribute food, we distributed the means for cooking, for providing. That was one way of giving dignity, but some people commented, when you people come to us, we don't feel that we lose our dignity. Why? Because if I think I have to give a handout to someone, it's a question of pity, isn't it? But if I have the vision that this world is my family, I'm actually helping my brothers and sisters, and that's a very natural thing to do, and it doesn't take away dignity. So the vision and the perspective of faith is so important in this arena. I think another thing that faith perspective reminds us of is the trauma that people have been through, and the trauma, and my brother referred to that, the trauma that has been passed on through generations. And to realize that so many behaviors, decisions are trauma informed. And this is something that helps us to be much more sensitive to people's needs and less judgmental, because it's very easy to judge people from their actions on the surface without seeing what has gone on internally that has led to those actions. And, you know, many of us, if I just speak personally for a moment, my mother was an immigrant to the UK. On my father's side, both his grandparents were refugees. And it was only a few years back that I understood the impact of that trauma on me personally. And I had to learn to let go of certain feelings that were not really my own, from my own experience. It was a revelation. These are very complex matters, but faith can help us in these understandings. It's very important. Faith is very inclusive in its perspective, and especially the voice of Indigenous peoples, of young people, of women. Women are half or more than half of the world's population, and they, you know, a woman's first thought will be of nurture, of care, of taking care of the community. And this is what is needed, and their voices are very, very much needed. Our voices, of course. It's about shifting our perspective, shifting our motivation and intention, from one of greed to a generosity of spirit that doesn't just think about the interests of a few, but the interests of the whole. And again, coming back to Indigenous voices, hearing one woman, an Indigenous woman from Malaysia, and she made a plea. She said, please don't see us as a problem. We are part of the solution. And so I really feel that the faith perspective, or the input of faith, it gives people courage, gives people strength. The resilience has been mentioned. The connection with the divine gives us so much strength. And we mustn't also underestimate the power of silence, the power of prayer, the power of meditation. And so without the faith input, equally with science and economics and all the other things we think of, how can we again have a flourishing world? Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sister Maureen. Thank you for sharing your testimony. Thank you for leading this work, and Brahma Kumaris. And also thank you for reminding us of how important women's voice are, and how in the most areas in the front line, women are there leading the fights and leading the work. So thank you for reminding us. And now we have some minutes for questions. We open the floor. I think there is a microphone somewhere. And please just raise your hand and then we can have the questions.
All right. Thank you very much for those insights, to some extent, lived realities as well. Basically, my question, just to poke your mind, is then, as faith actors, you do have a unique position with regards to engaging on the same issues we're discussing today, loss and damage. However, to what extent are your insights being taken by the negotiators? You would know right now they are in various discussions speaking about this, but then there seems to be some discord in terms of how things are going. So how are negotiators taking this up? And coming from also, I'm from Christian Aid and my name is Adrian, also coming from a faith actor's point of view as well, what would you see as things or actions we might need to do to ensure that our propositions are put on the table and eventually seen within the texts that are being developed at the moment? Thank you.
Okay, I see 2 hands. Maybe we can have a first round, 3 questions, and we come back to the table.
Hello. Thank you all for this this wonderful panel, and I think my name is Sriram Madhusudanan with Taproot Earth, Global Climate Justice Organization. And I think that my question in particular is, as there's calls in the hall, especially from movements around the world, for climate reparations, and seeing also, I think, the overwhelming cause of this problem has really come from a handful of countries and entities, primarily based and headquartered in the global north. What is your view on that from the faith perspective, especially the opportunity, I think, in terms of rebalancing relationships for some of these actors to seek redemption instead of a perpetuation of this system, which is often what we see in this space? So thank you all.
Thank you for this perspective. I'm Pavel from Bangladesh Center for Indigenous Knowledge. Basically, I want to know, I'm also doing work on the non-economic loss and damages, but how we define the quote unquote, the non-economic loss and damages in the international negotiation, and how we include the non-economic loss and damages issues in each country's the NDC report.
So I think we can open for
Anyone can go.
anyone can.
Anyone from the panel can just go to respond to any of the questions or comments, please.
Thank you. I want to respond to Adrian. You asked a very fundamental question, and it speaks to how do we get to engage this. Number one is to recognize. The gaps that are existing in the losses and damages agenda in the context of non-economic losses and damages. Now, there is a research that is being done, and in fact, there is a framework that has been established by one good example, a faith-based organization, the Lutheran World Federation. When we came here, we had a side event with the vice chair of the IPCC. It's important to note that in as much as the negotiations ongoing are political and are really built by some key fundamental multilateral factors, but then again, I want us to admit and acknowledge that science informs most of the decisions that are made here. That is why the IPCC report has been establishing, the IPCC has been establishing reports from AR1 to AR6, and it's going to be happening again in AR7. And in that discussion, we all agreed that the IPCC executive committee, in fact, the one that has been producing the reports from AR1 to AR6, has lacked a clear methodology in terms of approach on how to recognize non-economic losses and agenda as a fundamental and integral part in these negotiations. Though they speak of it, but there is no a clear means of redefining it. So number one, I feel like we have to push for the recognition, and this recognition only comes when we do research, when we publish reports, when we speak our stories, and when we clearly communicate what we want in form of lobbying. That is number one. That is why we are here. Our yellow colors in our badges are not all in vain. Okay, there is something that we're doing here. That is why we have gotten access to these negotiators. We've gotten access to key platforms, the vice chair of the IPCC, and through that nexus, then we're in a position to lobby for what we want. When a clear method is lacking as an approach to recognizing non-economic losses and damages, then that already gives us a platform to identify a gap and to fill our insights as a gap. Let me stop at that.
Thank you. I just want to answer your question, and on behalf of the Vanuatu and the perspective of Vanuatu, how we see non-economic loss and damage affecting our community and how the Vanuatu government is leading negotiations. So in Vanuatu, we are trying to encourage and promote spaces where government sits at the table and civil society as well sits at the table. Consultative approach. And also we encourage the bottom-up approach. So it's the community that are going to implement the policies that will be sitting at the table and saying to the government that some of the things might not work and this might work. So this is how when non-economic loss and damage impacts affecting, non-economic loss and damage are affecting our communities, we see this kind of approach that the government is taking. And also, I am not from the government, but working for FAO, Food and Agriculture Organization, UN agency, but I have my government party badge to be part of the negotiation. Sitting, we have the same, because we talk at the same table, at the same level, so we have these positions and all of these reflections and experience together, so we can sit at the same table as our government to talk about issues that are affecting our community. And we believe that our voices, all of the discussion that we had back home, when we come here, all of our leaders are really pushing forward for all of this to happen and to support the vulnerable communities. Thank you.
Thank you. That's heartening to hear. Thank you, sir. I just wanted to respond to the question about climate reparations. You know, there's still a huge injustice in the sense of the loss and damage fund, or the funds that are being offered to many of the states that are the most affected, are still being offered as loans. And this to me is like, you know, well, I think to all of us, such a huge injustice, because it means the richer nations are still exploiting and making money out of the poorer nations and making them poorer. And really speaking, to rebalance this, those of us in the richer, I don't know how to north, south, there's all these divisions, but we need to change our lifestyle and our way of living. And of course, this is where faith gives the inner capacity to do it. But we have to adopt a simpler lifestyle in terms of our diet, our technological use, our use of plastics. I mean, you will know the list that is long as I know it. But unless we're prepared to do this, we really don't have a hope of rebalancing. And so it is important that we consider this. Thank you. Oh.
Yes, please.
To answer to the question of faith base in contact with the negotiators, in previous COPs, we have had different faith-based organizations that have been quite close to some of the negotiators. And I'm talking about the Pacific Council of Churches representative, for instance, the World Council of Churches representative as well, Anglicans as well, and the Lutheran World Federation as well, at different times and at different moments. One thing is to be present with them as they are here, but there is another very important aspect that needs to happen before negotiators come to COP, because I think that's where some very important issues can be dealt with and the process begins, because they also need to make sure that there's a level of trust. The second thing I want to bring to the table is that before the COP29 began in Azerbaijan, there was a summit of faith-based leaders. And one of the calls that came from that summit was to ask the organizers to make sure that there will be a group of consultants coming from faith-based organizations that will be present at the deliberations and will have access to meet with negotiators. So there are two moments, one that happens before and one that happens through the entire COP. On the issue of justice that has to do with reparations, yes, I agree 100% with what Sister Maureen said. It's a matter of moving from greed to a sense of enough. And our indigenous brothers and sisters have made it also clear buen vivir, en vez de vivir bien. It's moving from the matter of greed into the concept of enough. But it takes time because people need to be aware that there is a climate change issue and we are seeking for climate justice because there are still a lot of people that are not aware that we are experiencing global challenges and local challenges of climate change. Thank you.
I think the first question and the last question are very linked because sometimes, as um, our speaker said, negotiations starts before COP in our countries. So it is very important that faith organizations are already negotiating with the government in the countries. So if we push we work together as a faith organizations in our countries and make some meetings maybe in order to get some terms about non-economical loss and damage terms, and also indigenous peoples and youth in the NBSAPs. So it would be great. I think the national and international level must be very linked. And then I would like to say that also faith organizations must be working together with other constituencies like IP caucus or youth and gender constituencies. It is very, very important to work together in order to get some terms into the decisions. And I would like to share some experience in Bolivia because there's a web page that was proposed in COP16 about traditional knowledge. We are as a country, there's this proposal for gathering all of the traditional knowledge of every country. So it could be a great way to gather all of the information about traditional knowledge. But I think as countries and regions, we have to determine what is traditional knowledge, what is what we should be keeping safe, and even keep these terms into the international level. So I think for decision makers, it is very difficult to determine what is traditional knowledge, what is non-economical effects to loss and damage, and that's why it is very difficult to determine what it could be a great idea, I think, in this level. So if we could be very specific about traditional knowledge, about non and loss and damage, non-economical loss and damage indicators, I think we could be we could have great decisions. So we could start doing some indicators in our countries, in our communities. How could we measure that? How could we proposing some goals maybe in this framework? And yeah, that's what I want to share. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Wara. We will take the last round of questions if there are before we come to a close. I see a hand there, please.
Hi, thank you for sharing your experience and insights. So my name is Sneharai. I am from Nepal. My first question is for the Vanuatu panelist. I would just like to know about any case or example from your country where they have shifted from not being able to adapt to loss and damage of the majorly the cultural aspect. How did they shift from not being able to adapt and then to the cultural loss and damage in Vanuatu? Any case or any example? Second one is for to maybe all the panelists. Um, is there any loss and damage framework in your country available or not available? If it is available, then how it has addressed the non-economic loss and damage part? And if it has already addressed, then what, if has not addressed, what is your organization doing to make it impactful and to put the narrative of non-economic loss and damage in the framework? Thank you.
Thank you. Any further question? Yes, please.
Thank you very much. My question is addressed to the Archbishop. Thank you very much for your presentation. In regard to the integration of non-economic losses and damage into adaptation and damage mechanisms, how can international agreements such as the Paris Agreement be amended and strengthened to include explicit provisions for non-economic loss and damage, particularly in vulnerable communities? Thank you.
In view of the limited time that we have, we would stop at the 2 questions, or maybe more than even 2, because the lady from Nepal have raised a number of questions. But we will start with Stephanie from Vanuatu, please.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. And also, during my speech, I didn't even give examples for non-economic loss and damage. Non-economic loss and damage. But to give you an example for how our community face loss and damage, in Vanuatu, we have tropical cyclones each year. It's a must that we have tropical cyclones. And each year it's becoming more frequent and more intense. So I think it was last year, a cyclone came earlier because we have a cyclone season, which starts November to April next year. And we have last year a cyclone that came in October. So this changed a lot of, people were very shocked and said, oh, we had cyclones it's not even the season of cyclones. And we rely on our traditional calendar for the crop planting, for all of our traditional ceremonies. And this really affects this whole system in place where people can, okay, maybe this year we won't be eating this crop, or that particular event won't happen because we have a tropical cyclone that came and damages our crops or livelihood. So a proper example is when we have disaster and people from a coastal area has to move from this particular area. As one of my colleagues here had mentioned, people feel belong to the land. And when they move, it changes all the traditional practices. They got medicine out from plants there. And when they move they have to relocate and go up to the hills. They are not familiar with all of the other plants or so on that are in the coastal and are not up the hill. So I think they lost so many not only practices, but also traditional knowledge that passes on to other children's. Like, we cannot do that anymore. We used to do this, but now that we are here, up the hill, we cannot have this kind of ceremony because we don't have enough crops or enough, things that we have in the coastal area, and we have to move. And also for the land and the burial places, like one of my colleagues mentioned, we have now some of the areas that are underneath water, the burials, so that the children cannot visit their great-great-grandfather anymore, and they are not completely linked and tied to all of our culture and practices, and also spiritual and traditional taboo areas. So I think if I'm not answering the question, you can talk to me later outside. Thank you.
May I invite Archbishop Julio?
Sure. To answer the integration of non-economic loss, we have to make a little history, because once in the Paris Agreement, there was clearly an understanding that there was a need for funds to take care of mitigation and adaptation. It's just in the COP that happened in Sharm el-Sheikh where we actually got loss and damage on the list because it wasn't there before. The mitigation and adaptation also work in the same arena as building up resilience to respond to and to be prepared for disasters. But then again, we were very happy and pleased to see that mitigation, adaptation, now we're going to be talking as well and making sure that there's preparedness and funds for loss and damage. COP29 is a finance COP. And it's so because there is a need not only to visit not the amount of money that was placed in the Paris Agreement, but there's a need to revisit that amount. It needs to be augmented. But some of us are a little skeptical, because if there were countries that were not meeting their goal, or countries that were late, what would be happening in the future if those examples persist? How can we get governments to commit to what they have signed on to? Is one of the challenges that we have to face. And we want to make sure that the funding that is going to be offered is a funding that is meeting the reality of the needs of the people on the ground. But again, some of us don't want to talk to governments anymore. It is either because of the bureaucracy, or it is because of the lack of will to have things done in making sure that human beings are placed again at the center of the discussions. So some of us don't want to talk to governments anymore, but we want to talk to the owners of the corporations that are not responding to the challenges of climate change. We have seen over and over again that governments is either too much bureaucracy or it's lack of will. It's not happening. And people are dying. People are dying. And we don't think that it's only the government that need to step up in what they're doing, but the owners of corporations also need to step up in what they need to do to make the funds available for loss and damage, non-economic loss and damage as well. And keep also adaptation and mitigation and resilience funding. Thank you.
Thank you. Unfortunately, time is no longer friendly to all of us. Yes.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you, Archbishop Julio. Thank you for being this prophetic voice. And I think we should be in touch to better talk and better address the next COP, which is going to take place in Latin America, and also WARA. Muchas gracias. Y creo que necesitamos también ahí estar en contacto. So it would be fantastic to have more time to have this discussion. And I think it would be really helpful if you had a tool or something to better understand the non-economic loss and damage. And I think we have it. So I would like to invite Budi to come here and to explain some results of the study that was conducted by some faith-based organizations. So thank you so much, Budi.
I don't know how to press. Oh, so it's okay. So thank you very much. We are in hurry because there's another side event coming. But we, the faith-based organizations like the Lutheran, Franciscan, Brahma, Kumaris, Dominican, etc., we did a study together since the beginning of this year. In the study, we had conversations, in-depth discussions with different faith communities coming from different parts of the world. And we include indigenous people, women and young people as well, so that it's very inclusive as we can. And we try to understand what is non-economic loss and damage from their perspective. And I will present some of the result of the studies, because what we are trying to collect is also their views about this non-economic loss and damages, not only from the structural perspective, but from their perspective. And this is also taking into account that in the current discussions in the UNFCCC and loss and damage, there is no definite definitions of what is non-economic loss and damage, but there are some indicators, there are some certain issues that we think it's part of the non-economic loss and damages. One of the finding is the fact that firstly, community cohesion and identity, that is the issue that is very much affected by the climate change. Cultural and religious practices that are central to the identity of many communities are being disrupted. For example, many are prevented from practicing traditional rituals that express gratitude to nature, like we just mentioned. In addition, younger generations migrate, as mentioned as well. The transmissions of these cultural traditions is interrupted, weakening both community cohesion and collective identity. Secondly, loss of territory, land, and ancestral land. People are increasingly being internally displaced or forced to migrate, often also to other countries. They have to settle in completely different environment. Like Sister Stefani mentioned, in the Pacific, for example, some coastal communities have to move inland to the hills, and they can no longer pursue their traditional way of life. And this is a disruption as well to them. Another essential consideration is the interconnectedness with nature. In many religions and faith traditions, nature and humanity are seen as equals in harmonious relationship. However, as extreme weather events increase, nature is often seen as a source of suffering rather than the source of life. Some communities even interpret these changes as a consequence of loss of faith, feeling that they are being punished or that the nature itself is expressing anger to us. So it's very interesting. Instead of understanding this one as part of the climate change, but they feel that this is God that is angry to us because we are unfaithful. So there's a feeling of, us being not doing our duty as a faith person. The fourth is we should consider the loss of faith and hope. The emotional and spiritual impact of extreme climate events can cause people to question their faith and ask why such suffering is allowed to happen. The spiritual struggle makes it much harder for people to cope with the impact that they are facing. Lastly, is psychological well-being, and it was also mentioned several times. A growing phenomenon among young people is to have climate anxiety or eco-anxiety. Many young adults share deep concerns about the uncertain future due to climate change impact, biodiversity loss, and social disruption. This psychological burden is a profound non-economic loss and damage that cannot be ignored. So we are now wrapping up this study, and as mentioned as well, this study will be shared publicly, but also will be shared with the government negotiators, so that they can take into account what we think. This is our concrete experience. As the bishop also mentioned, that we are with the people. If natural disaster happens, if climate change impacts the community, the faith community are there to help. So that's why our voice is very important. So that's in a nutshell the result of the study. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Bodhi. So in conscious of time, we have to close this session. Thank you so much for joining us in this side event. It's so nice to see all of the people here. Have a good rest of the conference, and do not forget the communities affected by the non-economic loss and damage. Thank you.